Bend Around the Wind by Skylia. Chapter 88. Liberate, Part 3. I detect Bifrost activity above the city, sir, Jarvis reported. The city would be safe. That was one of the mantras Tony kept repeating in his head over and over again. The city would be safe. There were more than enough people down there fighting. Not just the Avengers, but Bee, Juyu, Drongo, and Hatchet, the freaking Marines, a bunch of Fae, and now even Thor. Maybe he brought back up too. The city would be safe. Regrettably, I need to remind you, sir, that the time you have been given by the other is almost up. Tony sighed loudly because he definitely did not need a reminder of that. He was painfully aware of every single second that passed since he's been given that particular ultimatum. Same song, new verse. The other already had Loki. Now he wanted him to surrender as well. Did he actually have a choice? Not really. What is the suggested course of action, sir? Jarvis asked. That was the big question. He's been desperately trying to come up with something. He knew that surrender was not an option, not just because everything in him rebelled against the very idea, but also because Loki would have been angry beyond words if Tony gave himself up. He could so clearly picture the look on Loki's face if Tony just said screw it and marched over to the other with his hands in the air. Loki wouldn't just be furious, he would be disappointed in him. He could never surrender, especially not when it would not even free Loki. Tony managed to win some time as soon as the battle on the ground started. He had to know how dangerous this situation actually was for Earth. As time passed, Tony couldn't help but think that Loki's plan worked. Well, everything but the part where Loki was supposed to slip away from the other. Such bullcrap. Every other part of the plan worked flawlessly. Why couldn't this work as well? Sir, your time is almost up. What is your next step? Jarvis asked again, a little more urgently. Well, he couldn't surrender, and he couldn't run, so that left only one option. We're going to fight, he said determinedly. There was no doubt in his mind that Loki would be more than angry about this option as well, but there really was no other choice left for him. He hoped to never be forced to make a decision like this, actually see whether he would risk Earth or a city as big as San Diego for Loki, because he wasn't sure about the answer. Right now, he only knew that the one true threat was the other's ship, not the soldiers on the flying chariots and their guns. They were going to be defeated, no question about it. The sole threat was the ship that had Loki inside. The funny thing was, he didn't even know whether he was risking the city for Loki or risking Loki for the city. It all depended on how he looked at it. How do you intend to launch your attack, sir? Jarvis asked. How many ships from the Pacific Fleet are currently down in the harbor? Tony asked. The current numbers are 13 destroyers, 6 cruisers, 4 frigates, and 7 amphibious assault ships. There are a few other smaller combat ships as well. Would you like a more detailed list? No, I know enough, Tony said. This was not bad at all. Of course, it could have been better. I want you to connect me to every single battleship under us. I need to be able to talk with everyone in charge. And make it quick, we don't have much time. Right away, sir, Jarvis confirmed. It took a few moments, because there was no established line of communication. Tony could feel his palms sweating, and after a moment he willed his gauntlets to cover his fingers. He was tempted to let his helmet slide into place as well, but since nobody was around to see him, there was no need to hide. He knew he was freaking out. He knew it from the way his heart beat too heavily, how his chest hurt with almost every breath, how his hands were trembling constantly. He could still picture Loki before his eyes, the way he saw him last. Chained and strung up by his wrists, his whole body taut from the strain of it. Chained and strung up by his wrist, his whole body taut from the strain on it. There'd been no blood, and that was worse than Tony thought it could be. If he had seen blood, he would have known the extent of the damage. He would have known that it was just some physical injury Loki could seamlessly heal from. But there had been no blood. Tony had only known that he was alive because he twitched a little every once in a while. The permanent grimace on his face had been all too familiar, too. Tony only ever saw that expression when Loki was in serious pain or having a nightmare. But the worst was still that Tony had no idea what had been done to him. He'd wanted to shout, demand to know, but he hadn't. He took a large breath to steady himself again. He'd worn a rather good poker face when he talked to the other. He'd tried to hide what seeing Loki like that actually did to him. It was important not letting the enemy know how to hurt him. If he would have shouted abuse, if he would have slipped what he truly felt, the other would have used it. If he were truly aware of how much Loki meant to him, he would viciously use it against both of them. So Tony had kept up the pretense of simply being Loki's ally, no matter how hard it had been. He wasn't sure whether he would be able to keep up the facade. He wasn't sure whether he would be able to keep it together even a little when he saw Loki again.
"You can start talking whenever you want, sir,"
Jarvis informed him. Tony sucked in another breath, because if he did not sound confident enough, this plan was screwed from the get-go. "Attention to all ships currently in the San Diego harbor. This is Tony Stark. You probably heard of me. We may have a chance to fight back and end this assault on Earth, but you're going to have to listen to me." For a moment, there was an explosion of voices, which was, of course, something he should have expected. "Let's go by rank. Okay, people, I messed up your radio to contact you," Tony said.
"This is Admiral Henderson, currently on board of the U.S. Decatur."
One firm voice rang that silenced the others.
"If you have information regarding the enemy, speak immediately."
"All right, good start." "Thank you, Admiral," Tony said. "There are 2 spacecrafts up in the air above San Diego. The smaller vessel is under my command, so I would appreciate it if you would under no circumstances shoot at me. The large spaceship right in front of me is the hostile one."
"Can the hostile spacecraft be engaged in battle?"
the Admiral asked. "Not yet," Tony told him. "Ships like that have very advanced defense systems. None of your missiles or cannons would be able to do any harm at the moment."
"So what do you suggest we do, Mr. Stark?"
"I will try to give you an opening," Tony said. "Punch a hole in their defense. If I succeed, some part of the airship will be vulnerable to the weapons at your disposal. I suggest the use of your anti-aircraft weapons."
"How are we going to be able to detect the weak spot?"
the Admiral asked after a moment of silence. Tony sighed. "There's going to be an explosion, so you won't be able to miss it. I will let you know when you're free to shoot."
"Understood, Mr. Stark," the Admiral confirmed. "Proceed immediately. We will be ready."
"One more thing, Admiral," Tony said. "The hostile ship has an important hostage on board. As soon as we've done enough damage, you have to cease fire. We need to take down the ship, not completely destroy it." There was a worrying amount of silence on the other end of the line after those words. Tony was about to repeat himself when the Admiral started speaking again.
"Your information about the hostage has been noted, Mr. Stark," he started. "But the spacecraft doesn't just endanger the city or a country, but the entire world. I cannot make you any promises."
Tony clenched his jaw and gritted his teeth almost painfully. He knew they were going to say that. He knew it from the start. No military leader, regardless of rank, would risk so many civilian lives for one single hostage. Tony contemplated lying, giving them more reasons to be careful, but he couldn't bring himself to do that. Even if the Navy couldn't do anything for Loki, Tony could. He would make sure he got out of that ship in one piece, no matter what. It was his job, after all, not theirs. "Yes. Understood, Admiral," he said.
"We'll be waiting for your signal, Mr. Stark,"
the Admiral said before the line went silent. Tony was staring steadily at the other's ship through the central viewport. He passed the point where he could get himself to think over his odds and possibilities once again. He already felt numb with fear in some moments. He already had to force himself to shut that part of his brain down just to be able to function properly. "Sir, incoming signal from the other," Jarvis informed him. Tony clenched his fists and squared his shoulders. "Patch him through," he instructed. It took but a moment for the connection to be established. The other appeared on the screen, standing on his own bridge. Only Loki was no longer anywhere in sight. "Where is he?" Tony asked right away. The other grinned behind his mask. "So concerned for your former enemy," the other mused. "You're my current enemy, so he's an ally," Tony answered. "You should fear for your own life," the other said. "Your fate has been sealed. Are you ready to accept that?" Tony glared at him darkly. "Maybe you should accept something else instead," he started. "Take a closer look at what is happening around us. You still think you're Ed? Your soldiers are being taken down one after another as we speak. They don't stand a chance. Maybe you only had a handful of people fighting back the first time around, but things changed. Tony started at the tall and dark figure, his gaze steady and resolute. You already lost, he declared. You will try to run away from my planet like a beaten dog with his tail between his legs, licking your wounds. The others stared back at him. It was a shame that Tony could not see his face properly. He was most likely getting pissed already. And you will try to run back to your big bad master to grovel at his feet, begging for his help, but I won't let you. You came here, attacked my people, my friends, and I will make you pay for it. And Loki, after I'm done with you, I will toss you to him. I'll make you kneel in front of him and watch him take his revenge. Empty threats, the other spat. You will regret ever speaking them. Tony scoffed. You're just words, he told him. You're trying to be intimidating, buddy, but you're nothing but a lapdog. You're here on your own, and you're desperate. Pathetic, really. Silence, the other shouted. I will personally rip your tongue out once I capture you. You won't ever get a hold of me, Tony told him. Your army is almost completely gone. You are already beaten. Even if my mercenaries are defeated, my ship is more than powerful enough to destroy you all. You're going to have to go through me first. The other grinned maniacally, his smile sharp and angry. With pleasure, he growled. Tony cut the connection immediately. Jarvis, I handle maneuvering. You focus on power distribution, he said right away. Full power to the shields and engines. Ignore our weapons. They won't do us a damn good. And shut down everything else on the ship that's not vital. If we are attacked directly, the shields won't last for long, Jarvis informed him, which is why we're going to try to not get hit that much. Tony said, we need the shields for something else. I'm afraid to ask what that might be, sir, Jarvis said. Just make sure they stay up and functional as long as possible. As you wish, sir. One thing you would always love about Jarvis, he never argued for long, no matter how crazy Tony's plan was. It took Tony a moment to detach his mind from every single part of the ship he did not need to keep an eye on. He was so used to paying attention to everything automatically, even if just a little, as if looking at them from his peripheral vision. But since he integrated Jarvis into the Iron Mage, things were different. His AI was a constant presence around him whenever he used the DNI, like a comfortable cushion that just happened to be there at every sharp corner he might accidentally bang himself on. It's been an adjustment, but he created Jarvis. He knew how to work with him together flawlessly, even inside his own mind. As he ventured deeper into the ship's main control system, Jarvis started to feel closer and closer. It was a shame that they did not have more time to practice with the DNI. They were still not at the stage where nonverbal data transfer was 100% reliable. Some things were obvious, even without words, though, like the warning that they were being shot at. The ship turned sharply, avoiding the blasts, changing direction and flying higher up in the air, as far away from the city as possible. The other ship moved, turned to follow, as expected. Nobody could claim that Tony was not good at pissing people off. And the good thing about angry bad guys was that they were predictable. If you painted a giant bullseye on your back with some whoop please insults, they immediately forgot about everything else but trying to make you eat your words. It looked like the other wanted to prove him wrong too. They needed to lure the other ship a bit further away from the city, but not too far away from the Navy ships down in the bay. They were not going to get a second chance at this. Fortunately, Tony worked really well under pressure. They could not avoid getting hit, not for long. When the ship's body shook for the first time, Tony could feel his heart climbing up into his throat. This was more than just playing with fire. This was basically madness. Tony let his mind drift even deeper into the ship. He needed to fly with it the way he flew with his suit, the ship reacting to his every instinct. Once he reached that point of connection, the sound of the outside world faded away. So did most of his sight. This was more than just taking full control of the ship. It felt like a whole new dimension, a separate plane of existence. It was just him, deep inside his own mind and the core of the Iron Mage. There was only one thing he was constantly aware of, that soft cushion, that safety net, a light as bright as his arc reactor, electric blue, but still warm. Familiar, reassuring, like a pair of strong hands on his shoulders, steadying him, making sure he did not fall, watching out for him, always. Jarvis, closer than ever. He was not alone at all. He could do this. He was not even afraid. He turned the ship around, increased his speed. He let Jarvis know that they needed to put everything into the shields at the front without having to say the words out loud. The other ship was still shooting at them. They were hit again and again, the blasts tearing into the ship's bodies, shaking them violently. It was not enough to stop them, not by a long shot. They kept flying towards them with full speed, not even shooting back at them. Tony only spun left and right a little to avoid at least some of the shots, but it was not his main focus. Jarvis was warning him about the damage done to the ship, how their shields were slowly giving out, but the AI knew what Tony was doing and assisted like he was supposed to. Unquestioningly. Tony thought of Loki trapped somewhere inside that ship, tied up like some beast at the other's mercy. That one thought alone was enough to strengthen his resolve. Not that there was any time to turn back or slow down. He felt the force of the impact as a sharp stab. It felt like a knife pierced his skull. For a moment, he wasn't sure whether it happened to his body or his mind. Jarvis was there, still a warm electric light, but the darkness was stronger. The pain was burning, and he lost his connection, not just with the ship, but everything. Sir! Sir! You need to wake up! Sir! Tony sucked in a breath, opened his eyes, but he only saw darkness. His helmet was on, he was in his suit, but it was dark.
Jarvis?
He croaked. He wasn't sure he heard it right. He blinked a few times, and he became aware of his HUD. The darkness was dissipating as he slowly regained his sight. I am unable to access your suit, sir, Jarvis said. You need to take control immediately. Tony tried, but his head was dizzy, and the second he attempted to move, he felt really nauseous. He groaned in pain. You might experience some headache, nausea, vertigo, myasthenia, and neuropathic pain. Jarvis started reciting. You have suffered a severe backlash from the DNI. I have not the means to determine the extent of the damage. You are in need of thorough neural imaging evaluation. It took Tony a moment to make sense of all that, but at least he could make sense of it.
The brain scan is going to have to wait,
he managed to say then. His limbs were moving at least. That was good.
How did we do?
You need to leave the Iron Mage, sir, Jarvis said, as soon as possible.
Extent of the damage?
86%, sir, Jarvis informed him. The engines are expected to shut down any moment now. I suggest you leave through the Sentinel viewport.
No, wait. The Navy. You need to send a signal to the Navy. They need to start shooting.
You are in the direct line of fire, sir, Jarvis said. They cannot hit the target without hitting you.
Tony cursed. We need to move.
That is exactly what I suggested, sir, Jarvis said.
No, we need to move the Iron Mage,
Tony corrected. Inadvisable, sir.
Jarvis warned. I need to connect the DNI again.
Tony said, finally rolling over to stand up. His suit was intact, luckily. Now that his vision cleared out, he could see the stats in his HUD. Sir, if you attempt to use the DNI again right now, the probability of severe neural damage will increase to 68%. When Tony was finally on his feet again, he looked around on the bridge. It was a mess. He had no idea how anything was working at all. Half the room was damaged, the floor was cracked, and the viewports shattered. He did not dare think about how the rest of the ship looked like.
Fine, manual control then.
He relented.
Fire up all displays you can,
Tony instructed. It would do him no good to turn himself into a vegetable.
What is the extent of the damage done to the other ship?
Noteworthy, sir, Jarvis said, but not nearly enough to be considered significant. No, the explosion caused by the Iron Mage was never going to be enough. That's why they needed to give the Navy a clear target.
Let's move,
he said, walking closer to the two displays that weakly flickered into life. Sir, I need to inform you that your crew and the Avengers have been trying to contact you even more vehemently since the explosion.
Tell them I'm alive,
Tony said. There was no time to tell them more. He could explain everything once they were done with this all. The Iron Mage was in a really bad shape, but it had to have enough juice to move away from the other ship. It moved sluggishly, but it did move. They were half stuck in the bigger spaceship because they literally punched a hole in its body. Impressive, but it came with a price, a heavy price at that. It was crazy, but necessary. Nothing would have been strong enough to do this, only the Iron Mage. Now this hole, this noteworthy damage they did, was the perfect opening, something to shoot at. It was a weak spot on the other ship where the advanced shields and defenses were gone. Now Tony just needed to get out of the way. Come on, come on, he muttered as the engines fought to dislodge the ship where it was stuck. He knew they were moving, so it was working, just slowly. There you go, baby, I know you can do it. They immediately started flying a little faster when they were finally free. The ship's whole body creaked, though it was an unpleasant sound. Jarvis, send them a signal. They have to shoot. Now. He did not want to go that far because he had to get Loki out. He only needed to wait a little bit, just until the Navy did enough damage. With the gaping holes in the Iron Mage's body, he could hear it clearly when the cannons on the destroyers started firing. A moment later, he saw as the shots landed on the other's ship, and just as Tony expected, the weak spot worked. Now even human weapons could do plenty of damage. The sound of naval guns had never been so sweet. All the ships were firing at it. It was exactly how Tony pictured it. The other's ship wavered and backed off a little as it was hit again and again. It was a beautiful sight, honestly. Then the whole bridge of the Iron Mage went dark. Jarvis, we lost the generators, Jarvis informed him. The damage is too extensive to restore them. The engines shut down. The ship is falling, sir. Do something. I cannot, sir. You need to exit the ship, Jarvis urged. Tony cursed. Where are we? Are we going to fall on the city? No, you have gone far enough. The ship will land in the ocean, sir, but you need to leave immediately. His ship was falling. It was no time to be emotional, but shit. The central viewport was half destroyed, so Tony raised his hand, his repulsor coming to life immediately. There was something particularly hurtful about watching the glass shatter after all these years gazing out through it. He looked around at the bridge, how dark and damaged it was, and he didn't want to feel like he was losing something important. It was a random ship they found and decided to take after but a few moments of thinking. They stole this ship, killed for it. But it was also what saved them. It was what brought him home. It was home for so many years. Tony clenched his jaw and flew right through the viewport, out of the ship and into safety. The Iron Mage was falling. Now he could truly see the extent of the damage. The ship was half burning, some parts completely wrangled. He could get it out of the ocean later. Fix it. Maybe. Right now, it was just a wreck falling from the sky, and Tony had bigger concerns. Status on the other's ship? He asked, turning his gaze towards their enemy. It appears to be rising up higher with increasing speed, sir, Jarvis said. Tony could even see it with his own eyes. It was moving away, backing off. But there was something else happening. Its engines were glowing, and it was visible even from the outside. They gave off a light that was expanding, starting to cover the whole ship. Is that a protective barrier? He asked and watched how the suit's scanners worked. It does not appear to be so, sir, Jarvis said. Tony blamed the numbness in his mind that it took him so long to realize it because he knew. Of course he knew. Maybe he never had the chance to see it with his own eyes, but he knew the technology well enough. Oh no, he breathed, and he started flying towards the ship immediately. He's running, he shouted. Tell everyone the bastard's trying to run. He's activating a warp drive. Sir, there is nothing the Navy can do about it, Jarvis told him. All the Avengers. No, full power into the thrusters, he ordered. A second later, he was blasting through the air towards the ship with his full speed. The ship was glowing, then the space was visibly bending around it, forming a circle. It was not damaged enough. No, he kept repeating as he got closer and closer. If he could only fly through the hole he made, reach it in time, get inside. If he could only... There was a flash, not as blinding as an explosion, and the ship was gone, like it was sucked into a vacuum, gone in a blink, as if teleported away. No! He shouted when he reached where the ship was a moment ago. Where is it, Jarvis? Where is it? None of the satellites around Earth are able to detect it, sir. It might be too far away already. No, he said again. His voice was weak, barely a breath. He just stared at the thin air where the ship was, where Loki was. Now gone. Gone! He was so close, but he was too late. Thor flew into his line of vision, and it took a moment for it to register in Tony's brain.
Tony Stark, our friends are looking for you,
He shouted. Tony let himself fall. The only reason he did not drop like a piece of rock was because Jarvis slowed him down. He still hit the ground a little too hard. Pain exploded in his head again, but he did not care. He really didn't. Sir, you are in immediate need of an MRI, Jarvis told him.
I don't care,
He said. Sir, you must... Tony ripped off his helmet and tossed it away.
I don't care.
He was on his knees, his hands digging into sand. He screwed up again. Thor landed on the ground not far away from him. He immediately ran closer and knelt down next to Tony.
Are you injured, Tony?
He asked, putting a hand on his shoulder. Tony shook his head, then turned to look at the sky again. He looked at the spot where the ship disappeared, as if willing it to be there again.
Our enemies have fled,
Thor said, squeezing his shoulder a little.
You have fought most valiantly, and we are victorious.
Tony looked at him, but no words came out of his mouth. His face must have shown enough, though, because the smile immediately fell from Thor's face. Tony tried, but he did not know what to say.
What is wrong?
Thor asked, his brow furrowed in confusion.
Loki.
He managed to say then.
What? Where is my brother? Has something befallen him? Speak, Tony. He took him,
Tony said.
He was on the ship, and he took him.
Tony did not keep his eyes on Thor, so he did not see his reaction. He looked away and saw how the Iron Mage was slowly sinking into the ocean. It was still on fire, too, smoke billowing above it. Loki was taken, and their ship was gone. His plan failed. He failed. He was too late. He managed to scramble a bit away from Thor before he threw up. He heard the god call his name, but he was too dizzy to reply or react in any way. The pounding in his head was louder than any sound around him. He just stayed down on his knees and tried to get the tremors running through his body under control. But there was no use. It was too late.